His mother died when he was 5 years old. His father was in prison. He was sent to live with relatives. He defied all expectations to become a media mogul, a syndicated radio show host, been on Fox News, MMA fighter, stand-up comedian, author, movie producer, and more. And he's coming to tell a story. Welcome to the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. In the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show, we are joined by special guests talking about their experiences, the realities of investigating crimes, plus those who have experienced horrendous trauma. Police, first responders, military, and victims of crime share their stories. Hi, I'm John J. Wiley. In addition to being a broadcaster, I'm also a retired police sergeant. Be sure to check out our website, letradio.com, and also like us on Facebook. Search for the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. The Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show is brought to you in part by Breakfast with Champions, holding rooms daily in the Clubhouse drop-in social audio chat app. Download the app today. It is free. And join us in Breakfast with Champions, where everyone gets to see the table. Be heard. Find new friends from all over the globe. That's the Breakfast with Champions rooms in the Clubhouse drop-in social audio app. Get more details. Download the app today for free and get more details at thebwcinfo.com. Contact us from Phoenix, Arizona area. We have world-famous Kevin Jackson on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. He was a guest on the show long time ago. It's a wonder we're still alive, Kevin, to be honest with you. And
world famous. Yeah. If you people don't know me, you're racist.
That's exactly right, which we will talk about.
I'm bigger than Denzel, dang it.
Denzel Washington, I love. You know, I grew up watching that guy.
I got to see him. His son played football. He was on the developmental squad for the Rams. And I was literally 15 feet from him while I was sitting. And I saw him. I was like, I got to go up and say hello to Denzel. You know, and I actually spoke with him and took a picture with him. I don't like taking those types of pictures where you don't know somebody well enough and just standing. But it was the only opportunity I figured I'd get a chance to see him, and I did. So I took advantage of it.
And the funny thing is, being in the media, you know, I forget sometimes that people taking their photo with you is a big deal. And sometimes it can come across as being an annoyance. And I'm like, oh, man, I don't want to be bothered. But it's a really big deal to them. So did you find it sensitive?
He's so big that, you know, what was funny, people were leaving him alone. And, you know, as you should. But in my case, I was like, you know, I'm not going to be a jerk about it. I was like, hey, Denzel, can I get a quick picture? He's like, yeah. And he was watching his son and cheering. And then he kept cheering, and I just did a little selfie and walked away. So I wasn't like, you know, going to hang on like, hey, can I be in your next movie? Come on, Denzel.
Did you pull the line up? Do you know who I am, man?
I should have. I should have said that. I would. Don't make me want to think about it in retrospect, man. What I should have said.
You could have put the line on him. You put on me. If you don't know who I am, you must be racist. And I don't think that had gone over well with him.
I'm a big deal. I'm King Kong up in this. Isn't that what he said in Training Day?
Kevin is. Look, we have. And I'm not criticizing people. We all make prejudgments. We make prejudgments based off the way people dress, the way they carry themselves, race, all kinds of things, gender, you name it. And that's what we do. And it's a national protective thing to keep people alive. However, Kevin's story, you'll find out, defies a lot of that. And here's the amazing thing. He's not alone. There are far more people like Kevin Jackson than there are those who are not. Am I wrong there?
Totally right. And what's funny is, you know, every time you hear like a bad story, and, you know, my story's tragic to some degree, but I put my story in context of, and I'll use this as a real example. My oldest son, he wanted to get into Harvard on a program, and he ended up going to Wharton, but he didn't get into Harvard because in this particular program, they accepted a girl who was from Africa, and she had been a sex slave to the RUF. And it was a crazy story. And he's like, you know, well, you know, Dad, I'm a biracial kid. You know, I was like, really? That's your claim to fame? You know, that's your tragedy in America, is you're the product of a biracial, you know, family. And I go, this girl had been a sex slave for 6 years. You know, and just brutalized in every way possible, and, you know, and had to escape. from Liberia or somewhere in Africa, the Congo, I think it was, and this is the comparison. So, every time I think about my story, I think about my wife and I, we got over 1,000 kids adopted in a 10-year period, and there's hardly a story that isn't more tragic than mine.
Right.
And I mean dramatically so. And I'll give you an example of one of those. We got 4 kids adopted to one family. The 13-year-old girl had been raped by the mother's boyfriend at the age of 12, had a baby. We had to go force the mother to get this guy to put him in prison for raping a child, and then pull the children from her to get them adopted to a good family. But it gets worse. A family that wants to adopt them is a white family in central Missouri. Well, black people were mad that this white family was going to adopt 4 kids who went through a tragic situation with a crackhead mother, who was essentially, prostituting out her children. And I was going to these black folks going, "Are you kidding? Are you going to adopt them?"
Right.
So, the stories are tragic, and as much as my story is one, and it is, there's a tragedy here. Losing my mother before I turned 5, watching my grandmother grieve, taking my mother to a day surgery, picking us up from school, going to get her, and finding out in that moment that my mother is dead. And then all the things leading after that. My father was in prison, and he was a former Black Panther and committed armed robbery. Had been, he was a dope addict and the whole deal. So yeah, it's a tragic story, Jay, but it isn't the worst story you're going to hear in America.
And it's not. I hate to say this, it's not unique.
No, it's like I said, the one thing, there are things I said in my book when I wrote about that particular incident of losing my mother. I said, and I think it's pretty insightful. I said, on the day my mother died, I lost my mother and my grandmother. And people were like, "Oh my God, they both died." And I go, "Oh, you don't get it. My grandmother became my mother. Right. She adopted my brother and I, my grandparents adopted us. So she couldn't be a grandmother anymore. But up to that point, she was my grandmother. But then, you lose your mother on that day and you get adopted by your grandparents. Well, guess what? That happens in a lot of families.
Right.
And mostly black families, but it happens in a lot of families.
Yeah.
Period. So I look at my dad being in prison. Am I the only black dude with a dad in prison? No. Am I the only American with a dad in prison? No. There are white kids whose daddies are in prison. Now, are there more people that look like me whose fathers are in prison? Of course, there are more blacks in prison per capita. So, yes, the tragedies that befall the black community are, there's more, but it's not unique. And then when you get into my life after that, raised by 2 grandparents who my grandparents had loved me, raised me like parents, and that was a tragedy that I didn't have a grandparent, but I had a great life growing up on a 25,000-acre cattle ranch where my grandparents were the caretakers, and I got to see life through the eyes of the rich, the people who owned it, this rich white Republican couple called the Mormon family. They weren't Mormon religion, but Moorman.
Gotcha.
And then seeing their generosity towards me, where they said, I got to go travel to Africa and do all the things that their kids did because they wanted us, me and my brother, to experience many of the things that their children did. So it ended up being this extremely rich life born of tragedy. And see, that's the thing about the American spirit is it doesn't matter what you're dealt, man. You got to overcome it. And we bred that out of people.
Well, some reason, and I think the older I get, the less tolerant I am of excuses. I don't know about you, but I suspect you're the same way. One of the things that I told a guest I had on the show last week, her name's Julie. I've known her for a long time. She's like, I don't have a tremendous trauma story. I didn't overcome. And I tell her this, and I'm going to ask you before we get a break. It's your last half of your life that really matters. That's where you finish a foot race. That's the one that people really pay attention to, because your first half, you don't have a lot of choice in what happens.
Well, here's what I say to people about life. I say there's 2 important days in your life, the 2 most important days. The day you were born, obviously,
right, and
the day you find out what you were born to do. Now, if you're fortunate, let's say you're functional, you're Ken Griffey Jr. You watch Daddy play baseball his whole life. He trained you to play baseball, or you're Barry Bonds. Pick one. And you say, I want to be a baseball player. Well, guess what? That kid found out what he was born to do very quickly. It's very few people that do that. Many of us, we meander through life until finally something smacks us in the face and we find out,
we're going to have to take a break. We'll turn our conversation with Kevin Jackson in just a moment. Check out his website, thekevinjacksonnetwork.com. This is Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Julie Loken, CEO of the Mediacasters, an omni-media company obsessed with Breakfast with Champions every morning on the Clubhouse social audio app. This inspiring community helps me live a bigger, bolder life. And the best part? BWC is free. Download the Clubhouse social audio app today and join me for your daily dose of inspiration in Breakfast with Champions. Both are free. Online at thebwcinfo.com.
Looking to store sensitive samples or substances? A desiccator cabinet, sometimes called a nitrogen dry box, is the perfect solution. These cabinets maintain a low humidity environment to professionally preserve your valuable samples and substances. And where can you find the best desiccator cabinets? Try DesiccatorCabinetsDirect.com. They offer the lowest prices, quality products, and top-rated customer service for an unforgettable shopping experience. Visit them online at DesiccatorCabinetsDirect.com or search for them on Amazon.
Return our conversation with Kevin Jackson on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Kevin is a syndicated radio show host. He's been on Fox News. He's a movie producer. He's an author. He's an MMA fighter, stand-up comedian. His website is thekevinjacksonnetwork.com. I got to ask you this question before we return to the conversation. Where do you find time to get all this done, man?
Yeah, it's funny. As you read off the things that I've done, and some of them, like when I was training in the martial arts, has been since I was 8 years old, born of being this kid that lost his mom early on, and I used to fight everybody, so I figured I better get good at it.
Yeah.
But other parts of my career were just things that sort of happened, and that's how life deals you circumstances. My degrees in electrical engineering, computer science, and math.
Wait a second. You're an electrical engineering degree? I never took you for a nerd with the pocket protector back in the day. Remember that stuff?
Yeah. Total nerd, propeller head is what they called it. and I programmed supercomputers, and I got out of that. I went into sales, and then the rest. And then when I left management consulting after I did a stint there, I tell kids when I do college motivational stuff, I tell you I changed careers 8 times as an adult. And, of course, once I left management consulting, I wrote my first book, a best-selling book. Who knew that an engineer could actually be a writer, and a good writer? And then, I've gone into more. I'm doing a radio show, and I went into the movie production business and stuff like that. You don't know. You got to be prepared for that. But I want to go back to what was I talking about before the break?
You're talking about when you decide what your path is in life.
Yeah, what you're born to do. And what I was going to say there is that you look at Ken Griffey and Ken Griffey Sr., Jr. knew early on from watching his dad, I want that life. Good for him. But most people meander. Look at how you just described me. I mean, I'm finally at a point where God tapped me on the shoulder and said, this is what I want you to do. But it took many, many years. 2009 was when I left management consulting to do this. That's how long it took. Now, everything leading up to this got me to this point. So when people make excuses, Morgan Freeman didn't become an actual good actor. He was not discovered until he was in his 60s.
He struggled for a long time. He really was not a well-known name.
Not at all. Samuel L. Jackson got a break. He was a crackhead.
Right.
And he got a break. So, look, Kevin Hart talks about, he had been struggling for years before he caught a break, and now he's a top comedian. So you just never know when you're going to get that tap on the shoulder that says, here's what it is you're supposed to do. But what you should have, and the resilience that we should have, that God has put into each of us, is being snuffed out. because too many people are telling people what they can't do. There's always somebody that's going to help you, the government, or somebody's going to pick you up or sue somebody because you got called the wrong pronouns or something stupid.
Don't even get me started on that.
Oh yeah. So my upbringing, as a kid of the 1960s was, we call it handle your scandal. If something comes up, accept responsibility. Somebody gets in your face, it's fight or flight. But I was taught to fight. And because you fight long enough, people leave you alone.
Right.
So that resilience is what I would love to see America go back to, because that was what built this country to what it is. And we're watching it go in this strange direction. And you're looking at it from a law enforcement point of view. I mean, many times, and I'm very much back to blue. I made a movie about it called Bleeding Blue. For those who want to check it out, it's at bleedingbluemovie.com. And it was an award-winning film, but it's an amazing film that talks about the selfless people who do the job that you have done for many, many decades, and many of your friends and peers have done and continue to do. But we've made that job almost, the cops are now almost a pariah. If a cop looks at you wrong, he could lose his job.
That's the reality of the situation nowadays. It's gotten so bad. I believe that life is like a pendulum. It swings back and forth, back and forth. I don't know when it's going to. Hopefully it's starting now. What do you think of that?
It has to, because look at the lawlessness that's happening in this country. And we have a government that says, crime's gone down. Well, I dare you to believe that. I dare you to go into any major city. I'll tell you a quick story. I was in Chicago a couple of days ago filming at New Horizon Church, Pastor Corey Brooks. It's in the hood. It's on Martin Luther King Boulevard, which I don't have to tell many people. When I bring that name up on a street, you're in danger.
Right.
The street right up the block, one of the cross streets, they call it O Street. And it was where a guy's name was O.D. got shot. And Pastor Brooks was telling me that street is considered the most dangerous block in America, and some say it's the most dangerous block in the world. That's how many murders happen on that block. And he's building a church right across from it through a project we're working on called Project Hood. And they're now trying to make that street O Street to turn it into Opportunity Street. But I was there. I've been there before, and the last time I was there, I had to call a shot caller so we could film, so they would let me in. And the footage is amazing, because they were talking about all these kids being poor, and these guys are flashing gangster wads of money.
Right.
They were on crotch rockets, kicking up dust and stuff and pulling out their weapons. I mean, it was a dangerous, dangerous situation. But a shot caller approved it, so we got to go in there. Well, I got to go in this time without a shot caller, and we went to the church because we were filming something on DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, which, of course, is a joke. But these neighborhoods are super dangerous, and the police presence is most needed in those neighborhoods. And most of the black folks in those neighborhoods want the police there.
That's what I experienced. We were part of the community. Look, I get invited to people's cookouts and stuff, and they would ask you to sit down, and they'd apologize profusely if you got called to their house. I'm so sorry, my son did this, whatever. Can you sit down? Can I get you some drink? We were not viewed as the enemy.
Man, Jay, you're dating yourself, because let me tell you, I doubt today.
Well, the media portrays you as the bad guy now. What's the old saying?
Yeah.
The biggest trick ever played was when the devil convinced people he didn't exist. I said that was until the news media and politicians convinced the world that police are more of a threat than MS-13 and 1% motorcycle gangs.
Oh, yeah. What a, just, again, the left is, and I don't want to get too political here, but the media narrative against police is insane. Now, are there bad cops? Yeah, we talk about them. In my movie, we have a guy, his name is, we call him Mafia Cop. And he said, I work for the mob. He goes, I was the worst cop you wanted to mess with because I had the badge, but I work for the mob. And, so I don't gloss over it in the film, but here's what I do know. the majority of cops that I've met have been amazing people.
Right.
And I don't measure them by the uniform. I measure them by the humanity of what they do. And so many great things come out of policing. I mean, people that help other people in the smallest of ways and obviously in the biggest of ways, because that's what we profile in the movie, where a cop is the only difference between you and life and death is that person that's willing to put themselves in the line of fire, so to speak. So you got to appreciate that, but we don't. And so
we
I
don't
think
tend to appreciate a lot in this country. And by the way, I'm going to break here in a second. I believe it was Dana White talked about the people who appreciate America more are immigrants. The people that are born and raised here, they don't appreciate it whatsoever. They whine, they snivel, they complain. This is Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Return our conversation with Kevin Jackson. Check out his website at kevinjacksonnetwork.com. In just a few moments, don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Of all the radio stations in the United States, there are no other shows like the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. And on Facebook, there's only one official page. Do a search on Facebook for the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. And be sure to like the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show Facebook page.
First thing in the morning on my phone, I join the Breakfast with Champions morning show in the Clubhouse social audio app. Both are free. I can grab my coffee, no makeup, no hair to do, and connect with people live from all across the world to jumpstart my day. Join us in the Breakfast with Champions rooms in the Clubhouse social audio app.
Online at www.thebwcinfo.com.
Return our conversation with Kevin Jackson, contents from Phoenix, Arizona. His website is thekevinjacksonnetwork.com. He is a syndicated radio show host, been on Fox News. He's a movie producer, author, MMA fighter, stand-up comedian, and his story defies all stereotypes. And these stereotypes quite often are wrong because...
What's up, white people?
Well, look, you go to the grocery store and you got someone in line in front of you. You don't know their story. You don't know where they've come from. But so many people have come from where you've come from. Your mother died when you were 5. Your dad was in prison. You were sent off to live with your grandparents. And we're going to talk a little bit deciding when you found your calling in life. For you, that was 2009. You didn't get a tap on the shoulder, did you?
Yeah, so I watched my older brother. He was the first person to graduate from college in our family, and he was a tech. He worked as a tech. So he'd be soldering in the in a little room that we had, a little shed out in the backyard. And I was like, "What's that? What's that?" And he said, "That's a resistor. That's a capacitor. That's an inductor. That's this, that." And he would fix TVs on the side and make money, analog TVs. And so I got to the point where he'd bring a TV, and I'd be looking, I was like, "What's that?" And so I got a love of electronics. He was just an electronics tech. My brother eventually got his PhD in theology. So later, I wanted to be the first one in our family to get a doctorate degree, but he did. So yeah, so bright kid, bright family, and the whole deal. But but going back to the strife and all the things that you did, and losing my grandma, losing my parents, and all that stuff. When did I finally recognize this? So I worked as an engineer. And I left that job, went into sales, went into different types of sales, very different. Every time I changed careers, it was very different. It was almost like starting over. And then I ended up in management consulting, which I loved. I had a knack for going in and solving problems at a company. Well, when I left that in 2009, I left because the last gig that I had, we were supposed to turn this company into a multi-billion-dollar deal, and they decided they scrapped the program after hiring us from like a competitor. They scrapped the program a year in. Well, at that point, I wrote my first book, The Big Black Lie, and How I Learned the Truth About the Democratic Party, bestseller. I get on Glenn Beck. I'm starting to do Fox News, and then 3 years later, I become a Fox News contributor, hired by Roger Ailes. So I worked for Fox for 3 years. I got fired over a tweet, and I'm fast forwarding just to kind of get everybody kind of up to speed. But here's what happened in 2009, where I got the tap on the shoulder. I started writing because I was frustrated. I knew that politics in America was changing dramatically. I'd seen it as a management consultant. All the things that were happening in these companies. Obama was about to get elected. I wrote my first book and said, this is a ruse. Guys like him should not be in power. And when I was when I first started writing, before I wrote the book, I was writing blogs. And I wrote, 50 different blogs. And I was writing one, and I felt like I wrote the same blog. And I went, okay, God, I go, I'm done. I have nothing more to say on the subject of politics. And he tapped me on the shoulder, and he laughed at me, and he says, not only are you not done, you're just getting started.
I was going to say, you getting done with politics back in 2009? I don't think so.
2009, he said, I was ready to be done, and he says, nope, you're just getting started. I said, I don't have any more ideas. I feel like I've run out of ideas. And he says, in the morning, I swear a true story, God says to me, in the morning, you're going to have so many ideas, you're not going to know how to deal with it. It's going to be too much, and you're never going to get writer's block. If you ever do media, I'm setting you up for this, but you're never going to not know what to say. And I laughed. I was like, you don't get it. I'm done. I got no ideas. The next day, I couldn't even think straight. I had so much in my brain. And I was writing, and then I got discovered by a guy named Andrew Breitbart, and we broke the Acorn story, where they were, O'Keefe and Hannah Giles were, playing a pimp and a prostitute, bringing in these young Guatemalan girls, and Acorn was getting them housing so they could run their prostitution ring, and that story broke, and I got on Glenn Beck because of that. And the rest, that dictated my political pundit history going forward. And then it was 3 years later, I got hired by Fox. At that point, I'd written a second best-selling book, and the rest, as they say, is history. So what I was born to do, and everything that set me up for this, having lived in France, lived in China, speaking multiple languages, and having this degree in engineering where I can, logic degrees where I could dissect things, and then going into management consulting and going into companies and meeting with CEOs all over the world and understanding their problems and needs of their organizations. By the time I got into politics, I looked at it and went, boy, could they use my management consulting expertise? And that's why I built the Kevin Jackson Network and started dissecting, where are we going wrong? We're going wrong in pop culture. So I own a studio called the Flick Fest, where we help young artists get started. I looked at academia. So we started an organization called SeekingEducationalExcellence.org, which is a 501c3 to combat taking meritocracy out of education. Get race and stuff out of education.
Yeah.
Let kids go learn, right?
Let kids be kids, and they're sponges for information. That's the thing. And they want to learn how to figure things out.
Yeah, critical thinking. So all the things that I noticed were a problem. And the biggest one in the black community is they took away our ability to turn dreams into reality. Look, the only time I ever learn anything, Jay, honestly, is in strife. It's rare that you learn when things are going well.
Right.
It's when your back's against the wall is when you say, okay, I got to really learn something. I got to really go figure something out. And we've taken that away because we want to make it so easy that nobody has to figure it out. Every time I switch careers, and I talk about these 8 times I switched careers, every time I switched careers, it was something completely new. I had to go relearn it. When I talk to college kids, I tell them all the time, look, whatever degree you get, dismiss it. 72% of people that graduate college don't even use the degree they went to college for.
Right.
So it's a racket, but understand this. College is teaching you how to be nimble, how to think, how to be quick on your feet. And if you're not learning how to critically think, how to talk yourself off the cliff, because you're going to have to do it quite often. And life is, I don't care, you could be born with a silver spoon in your mouth, the child of billionaires, and you're going to talk yourself off the cliff, or somebody is going to have to talk you off the cliff. It's better if that inner voice of yours is powerful enough for you to do it. When I wrote my first book, my first royalty check was $38,000 the first month, and I thought, not bad.
Not bad. You're kidding me?
Yeah, but it was a step down from my salary when I left management consultant. The next month, it was $2,000. The third month, it was $1,000. And you know what happened, Jay? I said, Kevin Jackson, you're a book salesman.
That's right.
You better get out there and go sell some books.
That book, because they're not going to do it. Here's the thing, and we got a break coming about in a minute. I cannot I cannot sit comfortably and rely on other people to do for me because I just don't think they're going to do it right. And when you say you're a book salesman, did you have that moment of doubt where you said, I don't think they're really pushing this. I need to do it?
Well, that was the first month. It was like, oh, this is going to be easy, and then the second month hit, and I thought it would go up, not down, and not dramatically that far down. But after the third month, I knew it was on me. It was like, I'm not looking for a savior. Go get it done, KJ. And that's what I did. But that mentality had been born and bred in me from all the things that we talk about as strife, losing my mom,
right.
My dad in prison. That's what made that happen.
All that is what shaped you in the man you are today. And we're talking a little bit more about that in a few moments. We're talking about Kevin Jackson. He's a syndicated radio show host. Been on Fox News, a movie producer, author, MMA fighter, stand-up comedian. His website is thekevinjacksonnetwork.com. You can find us on Facebook. Look for and like the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show Facebook page. When we return, we're going to talk about developing this thing called courage. And it's not that hard to do. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Be sure to follow the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and podcast on the Newsbreak app. Newsbreak is your #1 local news app for current events, free live news for you and your community. Download the Newsbreak app today for free and be sure to follow the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and podcast on the Newsbreak app. There's a couple ways you can stay in touch and keep informed of what's going on with the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. #1, go to our website, letradio.com. Sign up for our email newsletter. It's real easy to find. I promise we don't spam you. I send out about one email every 2 weeks or so. And there's also a feature called Broadcast Channels on our Facebook page where we send messages directly to your inbox, directly to your messenger. Real easy to sign up for. Make sure you like or follow the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show Facebook page. And up top, you'll see broadcast channels, one for free podcast versions of the radio show, another one top post of the day. So you too can stay informed quickly, easily, and best of all, like always, free. Return our conversation with Kevin Jackson. Content is from Phoenix, Arizona. Kevin is, his website is thekevinjacksonnetwork.com. He's a syndicated radio show host. He's been on Fox News, movie producer, author, MMA fighter, stand-up comedian. His mother died when he was 5. His father was in prison. And somewhere along the way, he developed this thing called courage. Kevin, one of the things that I can relate most to you is the older I get, the more I'm aware I'm closer to my last day. I don't know what's going to be. The physical courage is not a big deal. It's the emotional courage that is the one that can be a big deal. You seem to have both, and you seem to have developed that tremendously. Is it fair to say you just don't care, or are you more measured in what you have to say nowadays?
It's tough to say, Jay, to be honest with you, because I haven't really changed. I think about when I was a kid. I'll never forget this. My older brother, we were going to visit our cousins, and there were these boys across the street that were 6'8" and 6'9", and this was back during the afros, the big afros, and the high heels.
Look, I had that too.
Yeah,
I had a bush like you wouldn't believe.
Did you? Well, these dudes looked like they were 8 feet tall because they were 6'8" and 6'9", two brothers. They played basketball, and they were in these big heels. And we pull up. My brother had driven us over, and we see them. I see these two guys, and it is me, my older brother, and my oldest brother and my other brother. It's a year apart. And we get out of the car, and the guy he says, like, "Hey, man," and he puts his hand on my other brother's head that's just a year older than me. And he got ready to reach for me, and I just looked at him. And I remember him saying to my older brother, he's like, "Ooh, what's this little one here?" And he's like, I ain't going to even bother to touch him. I had a look in my face that he went, "Don't bother him."
Right.
Well, and keep in mind, my mother had passed away by then, so I don't know what my look was, but I didn't like a lot of people. So I had a chip on my shoulder a lot of years, went to Ella Austin Community Center, learned the martial arts, because like I said, I was volatile. And I was volatile for quite a while because when you lose your mother and you get no help at all, there's no black people don't pay for counseling. So my mom was gone and that was it. And I was angry. I was an angry little kid. I wasn't angry at society though. I was angry at just not having my mom.
Right.
So I spent a lot of time in the martial arts, but I'll tell you the thing that I thought everybody was like me. I thought everybody was prepared to battle for whatever they stood for. And I'll tell you two quick stories. One was I was asked when I was writing my book, where did you get your courage? And I go, doesn't everybody have that? And they told me no. Well, quick story. We moved to Brady, Texas, a little bitty cattle town. We're a handful of blacks. They had a big meeting, population 5,557. There were 3,000 people in this meeting in town. My grandmother takes me. I'd had one piano lesson. Why? Because my brother had a piano lesson. And when you're poor, I demanded mine. So I had one piano lesson because my brother got a piano lesson. So we go to this event, and there's 3,000 people. We get there late, and they called a meeting. It was something with schools. So they asked, could anybody play the piano? And my grandmother shoves me. And I went, what are you talking about? I said, I have one piano lesson. One lesson.
You're not Liberace at that point, are you?
Exactly. She shoves me into the aisle, and I have to walk 50 feet up to play the piano because the guy goes, we got somebody, the moderator. I go up to that piano knowing I can't play it. You know what they wanted me to play? The Star-Spangled Banner so we could begin the event. Now, I want you to understand, people listening to this program right now, I've had one piano lesson. My grandmother says, I paid for a lesson. You can play the piano. Go do what they want you to do. So I go up there, and I said, what do you want me to play? He goes, Star-Spangled Banner. He goes, do you need anything? I said, you got the music? And he goes, everybody knows the Star-Spangled Banner. And I said to him, now, keep in mind, I'm 8 years old. I look at the guy and go, well, why ain't everybody up here playing it? And anyway, I figured I'd fake it. I would just play the first three notes and everybody starts singing. Well, they couldn't hear it. They didn't have a microphone. So no lie, Jay, true story. I beat to the rhythm of the Star-Spangled Banner with my hands, not playing a single note. I mean, I just literally beat the piano, bam, 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 with my hands. And when we finished, it was completely embarrassing. I walked back. My grandmother's sitting there with her head up in the air, as proud as can be. And I tell people that story because this is what I thought simultaneously in the same moment. I thought, how dare you, knowing that I can't play the piano, send me up to play the piano in front of half of this town. And simultaneously, I thought, there is nothing I will ever fear doing again in my life.
Well, what's the saying? The emperor had no clothes. You were stripped naked at that point. And once you realize that, it's kind of hard to really get under your skin, isn't it?
Well, when people ask me where did it come from, I didn't have an answer. I was like and then I remembered that moment where I thought to myself, man, if I could embarrass myself like that in front of that many people and not give a and to this day, not a single person in that town, and we're all good friends, and they gave me the key to the city. Nobody has ever brought that moment up to me. So, but it was funny. In that moment, I knew. The other thing was this. When I was about 12 years old, we worked at the ranch, my brother and I. We worked all summer. And I saved up enough money to buy myself new rods and reels and shells for my 22, et cetera. We come back from school. I see all my gear in the back of my grandfather's truck. And I'm hot. My brother and I drove our little Beetle back to where the house was 2 miles into the ranch. And I see my gear in my grandfather's truck, and it shouldn't be there. It's brand new in packages, and it's been taken out, and it's in the back of his truck. I go out there, I grab my gear, and I'm mad. I'm like, what in the world is my gear doing? This is my gear, and I'm saying it out loud. And my grandfather can hear me, and he comes off the porch, and he's like, well, you take your gear, but you can't use any of my stuff. And I'm like, I didn't want to use any of your stuff. I bought my gear. And we're arguing back and forth like grown men. And my brother is not saying a word. He's getting his gear off the truck like nothing ever happened. So we put it away. Fast forward 20-something years, my brother and I are talking together, reminiscing. And my sister-in-law says to me, your older brother has so much respect for you over one thing you did when you were a kid. I go, what? She says, when you snatched your gear out of Daddy Ernest's truck, and y'all argued like grown men, but you stood your ground. I said, you know why I stood my ground? Yeah, he's my grandfather. He's my caretaker, right? But he was wrong. And he knew he was wrong. And when I got inside, my grandmother, who was upset that, I was being, quote, sassy, couldn't say anything.
Right.
Because I was right. It wasn't your gear. You want to use my gear, you ask me. But you can't just go take it because I bought it. You didn't buy it.
That's right.
Bought it.
I look, and there's got to come a point in your life say, look, we're both older men now. I'm significantly older than you. And I realize that what's the worst you can do to me? You can't kill me. You're not going to eat me. You're not going to do any of that stuff. The most you can do is fire me.
Right.
You had to come to the point to say, I'm going to say what I got to say, and I'll be honest and authentic to myself, and you do what you want with it.
Well, I just think, Jay, we have to instill in people that it doesn't matter who that is. It could be the person that runs the network. It could be a person that, you work for at a regular job. It could be a spouse. When it comes to your convictions, you've got to stand your ground. Now, for the most part, I'm a pretty easygoing guy. But if you push me into convictions, like when I got fired from Fox and they said, Kevin, if you take back the tweet, you can have your job. And I'm like, my tweet was truthful. You can have your job. I don't need this job to where it sacrifices me as an individual. You can have it. And I had a lucrative 6-figure deal with Fox, and I was working on a TV show. So had I capitulated, not only would I have kept my job, I would have had a TV show. But I said no. And here's what I say to Americans listening to the program. When you find people with that level of principle, you better protect them, because they don't exist. See, I used to think when I would stand up for people's rights, there would be a whole mob of people behind me ready to back me up. But
and
you know what I generally see?
They're not there.
They're not there, man.
It's like we're surrounded by people, and it's we got to have you back because we're out of time. But we're surrounded by people that seem to have lost this thing called respect for themselves, respect for other people, and respect for what's right. Kevin's website is the KevinJacksonNetwork.com. What are some of the things you'll find there very quickly, Kevin?
Well, like I said, we're going after Hollywood with the Flick Fest. I'm taking that company public because we want to challenge Hollywood with good quality movies. You can find out our charitable work at Seeking Educational Excellence. Really cool stuff. My blog, where I write daily, is there, and of course, you can find a link to my radio show, which is a 2-hour show every day. And I hope people. Yeah, it resonates with them, and they want to join and become, part of our recurring network of warriors, because that's what we need to survive.
Kevin, thanks so much for being a guest on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Much appreciated.
All right, brother. Good talking to you, Jay.
This was the podcast version of the nationally syndicated Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show, and we are so glad that you decided to join us. Big thanks to our guests for telling their story on the show. 2 simple things you can do. Be sure to check out our website, letradio.com. That's letradio.com. And be sure to follow us or like us on Facebook. Do a search on Facebook for Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. And be sure when you see a post that we put up that you like, that you resonate with, that gets your attention, be sure to share it with your friends. Back in just a few days, another episode of the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and podcast. Until then, this is John J. Wiley. See ya.